What happens when you force the most successful pilot in the history of F1 to unlearn everything that made him champion and follow in the footsteps of his teammate? Today you will discover the greatest risk Ferrari has taken in decades, just before one of the most unpredictable races of the calendar, Azerbaijan. Ferrari's decision to reschedule Lewis Hamilton completely represents a radical break with the tacit norms that have governed Formula One for decades. These types of decisions simply do not happen. In a category where the teams revolve around the talent of their star pilots, the logical thing is to build the car around the style and needs of the champion. But what Ferrari has done is investing that paradigm. Instead of adapting the car to Hamilton, he has forced Hamilton to adapt to the car. And yet Hamilton has accepted. Not because he has no pride, but because he understands the magnitude of what is being tried. Because maybe behind this break with everything known, there is a promise of something bigger. A revolution. But like every revolution, the price of failure is very high. If this does not work, if this attempt at total reprogramming falls in full season, not only will the Ferrari championship compromise, it could hurt, perhaps forever, the last great stage of the career of a legend. Just before the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, one of the most implacable calendar tracks, this transformation is still underway. Hamilton does not reach 100% adapted. The process is incomplete. But lines have already crossed that have no turning back. And with the narrow asphalt of Baku waiting for it, there is no more margin for trial and error. Now the risk is real. Now Ferrari's bet faces his first great test. And there is no security network. This extreme sensitivity not only requires millimeter precision, but also an almost instinctive reading of how the car behaves at every moment. The pilot cannot trust that the car will provide progressive feedback as with other monoplays. Here, errors do not feel like warnings. They feel like lashes. Feedback is abrupt, almost wild. It is not a car that leaves driving. It is a car that imposes its conditions. Another of the elements that make SF25 an indomitable creature is its rear vertical rigidity. The posterior axis is so hard that it eliminates virtually any possibility of progressive damping. Where other cars allow some flexibility in the way they react to potholes or lateral transfers, the SF25 responds immediately, without softening the impact. This implies that the aerodynamic behavior of the rear becomes extremely dependent on external factors such as tire pressure, axles alignment, asphalt temperature, or even environmental humidity. Small changes that for other cars are insignificant, in SF25 can completely unbalance the platform. To counteract this, Ferrari engineers have had to enter an extreme technical territory. They play with parameters such as the changer and the convergence of the rear wheels and configurations that touch the limits of the technical regulations. And yet, each circuit represents a different threat to the stability of the car. Because what works at average temperatures can become unusable with just a couple of degrees of variation in the environment. The SF25 is a very high complexity engineering work, but it is also fragile. Not in its construction, but in its operational coherence. And it is precisely this combination between structural genius and absolute demand that makes the SF25 a beast that, if it is possible to dominate, can be unstoppable. But if it is not understood perfectly, if you try to tame by force or under driving styles that are not designed for it, it becomes an unpredictable car, almost treacherous. Do not forgive mistakes. It is not fooled by instinct. Forces each pilot to operate at a total technical awareness level, back after return, curve after curve. For Hamilton, this represents a capital challenge. But for Ferrari, this philosophy encloses a deep belief that building the ideal car for a single pilot line, the Leclerc, is more efficient than designing a versatile platform. In theory, that bet has logic. But in practice, this conceptual rigidity can also be the Achilles heel of its season. Because in a modern Formula One that requires real-time adaptability, the SF25 has become the car that only works if everything around it from the weather to the pilot operates perfectly. And that, in a 20 racing championship, is an expectation as ambitious as dangerous. The question that this act is going through as a tension line is brutal in its honesty. Is Lewis Hamilton transforming into a new pilot, or is it being systematically annulled by the machine that must drive? Because what Ferrari has demanded is not simply a change of technical approach. It is a redefinition of his identity as a pilot. And not any identity. We talk about the most successful driving style of the hybrid era. An approach that not only led him to win 7 world championships, but molded a whole generation of pilots who learned to see in him the efficiency model under pressure. And this raises a much deeper dilemma than the technician. Because the confidence of a pilot is not a matter of attitude, it is a neurophysiological process that is built round after, when the car responds as expected. Hamilton, for the first time in many years, is working without that security base. He is reprogramming not only his style, but also his relationship with speed, with risk, with control. He is operating in a purely technical way, disconnected from his natural impulse. And although that may seem necessary for Maranello's logic, the risk is enormous. A pilot who stops trusting in his own judgment is exposed, not only to make mistakes, but to lose the essence that made it special. To this is added the pressure of the environment. Ferrari is not waiting. Ferrari needs immediate results. After years of frustrations, the Scuderia has opted for a narrative of total transformation. And Hamilton is his emblem. There is no room for error, there is no space for doubt. Every weekend it represents an implicit evaluation of its adaptation. And the shadow of Charles Leclerc, who has learned to live with the eccentricities of the SF25, is always present. Not as direct rival, but as a mandatory reference. Hamilton is not running against the grill. He is running against a system that already had a pilot designed for him. And yet, despite everything, there are signs that something deep is brewing. In China, Hamilton showed that adaptation is possible. That, even under pressure, is able to absorb the technical patterns of another pilot and execute with mastery. But it is not automatic. It is not comfortable. It is a painful process of dismantling habits, of rebuilding reflexes, of operating under a completely foreign logic. What we are witnessing is not just a change of equipment. It is a real-time human re-engineering process. A man who is trying to become something different to continue competing on top. But the danger is still latent, because this kind of transformations are not always completed. Sometimes, the attempt to become another destroys what was already unique. And that is what is at stake. If Hamilton manages to dominate the SF25 under this new logic, if you can integrate Leclerc's style without losing what he does, then we will be facing one of the most impressive reinventions in the history of F1. But if the process consumes it, if the car fragments it, if the pressure forces you to disconnect from its intuition, then we will have witnessed something darker. Not of a transformation, but of an cancellation. And right now, with the Azerbaijan GP on the horizon, that outcome hangs from a thread. Because Baku doesn't expect anyone. There is no time for adjustments. There is no patience for doubts. The most dangerous city of the calendar will be the definitive test. And when Hamilton accelerates in those narrow streets, he will not only test the SF25. He will test his own ability to rebuild himself while still being himself. And the whole world will be observing. Everything that has been created in Maranello in these first months of 2025 finds its turning point right now, in the hours before the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. The most risky experiment of the season faces its first major test, not in a controlled laboratory, not in the factory simulators, but in the unpredictable asphalt of one of the most treacherous tracks in the calendar. And what is at stake is not only Ferrari's competitiveness. What is at stake is an entire vision of sport, a radical idea about how the relationship between pilot and machine should work. Ferrari has opted for a path of technical totalism. He has built a car without concessions, has centralized its development around a single form of driving, and has demanded that even the largest fold to that architecture. In theory, if the plan works, the reward is immense. An optimized car to the extreme, capable of extracting additional tenths precisely because it does not waste time being democratic with different styles. But that same model contains his own condemnation. If the pilot fails to synchronize, if the minimum mismatch becomes disconnection, the punishment is instantaneous, and the potential of the car becomes a trap. Azerbaijan, with its fast and closed curves, is not a circuit that forgives indecisions. The SF25, which has already shown not tolerate margin of error, now faces the challenge of operating in an environment where each wall is centimeters, where each entrance to curve demands courage, and where any loss of traction can end up abandoned. There is no space for a pilot in an adaptation phase. Or you are within the rhythm or you are out of the race. And that places Hamilton in a maximum tension position. It must perfectly execute a style that still does not belong at all. On the contrary, if the experiment collapses in Baku, if the car becomes ungovernable in its hands, the damage will be deep. For Ferrari, it will mean that its commitment to conceptual inflexibility has failed. That a car cannot be designed around a single approach and then expect all talents to fold without cost. For Hamilton, it will mean that the sacrifice was not worth it. That everything that left his style, his intuition, his essence was not enough to integrate into a system that already had an owner. And the most dramatic thing is that both are possible. Ferrari can be glorious or tragic. Hamilton can emerge as the total pilot or get caught in a foreign identity. Baku will decide what story will be told in the future. And when the lights go out and the roar of the engines floods the streets, we will not be seeing only one race. We will be witnessing the verdict of the riskiest play of the modern era. A play that wins or loses has already changed forever the meaning of what it means to compete at the highest level in Formula One.